What you're doing in a day and how far you have to go, but you think about how many times a year you need to go for 200 miles. It's not that many. Really, most of it is holiday time when you've got a bit of time on your hands, so you can stop and charge. So it's not been a problem at all, like range-wise, I would say.
And when you use the Zap app and you go to the various different places that you might charge if you're not at home, what we've heard is that you need different apps to use different bits of the charging infrastructure. Have you found that with your different cars?
Yeah, I mean, it's also found that I travel all the way around Europe, and every time I travel around Europe, I rent an electric car and get. So it expands into the internet completely when you get into different countries, but even in the UK. There are hundreds of apps. There are some people that have made it a lot easier, where you can just do a touch card, use a credit card and touch it on the charger, and that charges you automatically, which is so much simpler because it goes directly through your bank. And that's I think is the way forward through that, to avoid this terrible process of arriving midway to a rain-soaked charger and having to sort of download an app and register to it and put in all your details, which has happened to me many times.
That's a good point though, actually, because one of the government changes that they are planning to roll out this year is to make sure that every single possible provider has pay-as-you-go tap and pay, because we can't have this situation anymore.
I mean, the owners of car parks might want to listen to what you just said. So, Richard, how are you finding the cost of the electricity with your two cars?
So the cost is an ever-evolving process. I'm in the process that what most people have noted that the cost of electricity at these charging stations has changed dramatically through the energy crisis. And from a slightly cynical point of view, I would argue that there's a bit of opportunism going on here, and I think a lot of electricity companies have taken advantage or use the energy crisis to massively hike up their rates. You're talking about, Tesco's, for example, 2 years ago, you could charge your car for free, and that's now gone up to 40p. Instavolt has gone from 40p to now 80p. Wow. Shell, a similar range of 70 or 80p. I have brought this to attention. I don't know if you remember about a year ago, the Competition and Markets Authority brought up this issue with petrol cars and actually tackled the overcharging for petrol at various garages, and actually managed to bring the petrol prices down because there was unfair competition. I think this is very much what is going on in the electricity charge market, because electricity doesn't cost 80p a kilowatt hour. It costs, something in the range of 20 or 30p, depending on your provider. I charge mine at night, for example, on a 3-pin plug, my little granny charger from my garage, at zero, because it was blowing like a hoolie last night. When the wind energy kicks in, the price of electricity drops to zero, and sometimes actually goes negative. So you can get a free charge, both of my cars, plus a charge on my home battery, because I've got solar panels and a home battery at home as well. So, I can charge everything up for free.
Richard, I must stop you there because we've got to move on to Judy in Sheffield, but thank you very much for that, because that puts the sharp focus on how much this actually costs. Judy, you share an EV. How does that work?
It works very well. About 2 years ago, we needed to trade in an old car, and my son and his partner were in a similar position. Now, separately, there's no way we could afford an EV, although ideally that's what we all wanted. But we realised by sharing our resources, pooling our resources, and sharing the expenses of the car, then we could have a system that worked for all of us. And it means that we have an electronic calendar that we, just for the car share, that we all share. We book ahead of time. It works really well. It makes you a little more conscious of when you might need it rather than just relying on it sitting outside the house. But since the car was spending quite a bit of the time sitting outside the house, it's good that it's used. It works very well for us. How does the charging work? We both are lucky enough to have a space where on our home chargers, so 90% of the charging is done at home. So it's the occasional top-up outside, but not very often, because most of our journeys are local ones.
And when you've used it, do you charge it up at your house and then hand it over to the rest of the family, and they use it and charge it up at their house, so you get a full charge every time you want to use the car? Oh, that's very neat. That's very neat.
Well, we live within about a mile of each other, so dropping off and picking up works fine. But so we really recommend, looking to see if there's somebody else that you could share with. It works well for us.
And do the home chargers always work?
Not always. We had trouble with ours, and in fact it was out of action for about a couple of months. And that was a problem.
Months?
Yes. I found it very difficult to find somebody that did repairs. And in fact, I was on the point of giving up, because a lot of the firms that locally and in the region that said they did installation and repair, it turned out that really all they were interested in was installations. And I was told a number of times that they either didn't have the properly trained staff or didn't have the equipment to do repairs. I went back, I should have thought of it earlier, but I went back to the original installers, OME, and they were brilliant. They put me in touch with somebody, shepherded me through the process. It was soon sorted out, but no, I did find that I was getting a lot of, oh sorry, we don't do repairs, even the firms that advertised repairs.
Erin Baker from Auto Trader.
Yeah, I was just going to say, this is a fascinating, because this is a big part of the issue, that stops all manner of running electric cars, which is the lack of trained technicians. The lack of trained technicians to do grid installations to charging points, the lack of trained technicians to repair charging points, and the lack of trained technicians to make repairs to batteries for electric cars. Because we know now that we can repair the batteries, they don't have to be scrapped as soon as they're in a crash or so on. And part of the reason that insurance for electric cars is so high at the moment is because the cost per repair for electric cars is about 35% higher, because we're having to wait, owners of electric cars are having to wait for them to be repaired because of this lack of technicians. So, there's a bit of a call out there to any parents of teenagers who are looking at careers to consider battery technicians and so on, and charging installations. We really need them in the UK.
Well, let me go to Jermaine in Midhurst in West Sussex. Now, you're not having a great time, are you? And you've only had your car for 3 or 4 months. What's gone wrong?
Yeah, so I'm kind of getting used to the whole life of having an electric vehicle, and what my issue is that I set up the car to be charged at my kind of the low-rate electricity period, which is from midnight to 7 in the morning. And then in the morning, it's saying that it hasn't charged. And, well, it's not saying it's not charged, it's just not charged. And then I call the app company, and they say, well, their app was working fine, but they got a message that cable's not working on the charger. Try and call the charger company, they say, well, they've done a test and their cable seems to be working. So I've realised I'm part of like an ecosystem with this car, the charger and the app, and they kind of can all point fingers at each other if something goes wrong, which is really frustrating.
Half the Radio 4 audience is shouting at you. Have you plugged it in properly? I'm guessing the answer is yes.
I have plugged it in correctly, and this has happened over a number of nights. And the issue is because the low rate period is in the early hours of the morning, though, you can't kind of get up at 1 or 2 in the morning and go and see if it's charging okay, and I'm not getting a notification on it to say that there's a problem. It's just, yeah, very, very frustrating.
And does this only happen on your home charger? Have you been off to the expensive ones and plugged it in there to see if it charges?
They work. They've always worked for me. My only issue with those kind of chargers is, you know, you don't know if somebody's using it, or if it's broken, you get there and it's not working or something. So the other chargers seem to work okay, but I live in Midhurst, like you said at the beginning, and there's not a lot of options for chargers in a small village where we live.
So what are you going to do?
Well, luckily I've got a traditional petrol car or a diesel car, so you know, I could go and use a diesel car, but if I went electric, then this would be a real issue. I'd be stuck at home.
And how long are you going to keep this car? I mean, have you gone through the get a new plug, get a new cable, you know, go through all the checklists before you can find out what it actually is going on, or are you going to give it up?
I'll probably go through the process of I want it to work, and I want to be part of the new, you know, the new wave of vehicles. But it's just very frustrating that it's not like the old days where you had a car, it's got a problem, you take it, it gets fixed. It's the different people involved in different elements of your car working.
Can I ask, did you say it's definitely not a connection issue, the software, the car end of the journey of the electricity, is it? Did you say you've checked with your car, the dealer, or your local?
Yeah, I've checked the car is okay, I've checked the cable, they said it's okay, the app guys say that their app is okay, but the car is charged. I've just done a test today in the daytime, and now it's working. So I've got to plug it in tonight, and then I see whether it's going to work or not. I don't know. It's frustrating.
I mean, I'm quite
one person.
I have to say I had this issue for a while, and it turned out that I'd slightly done the timer on my electric car wrong, so it wasn't charging between midnight and 5 a.m. because I set out properly, but that sounds like me.
Oh, Jermaine, you've got to go out now and check the timers and get back to us and let us know whether you've got the 24-hour clock right. Thank you very much for calling. Pat is in Norwich. Pat, you love yours. Pat, can you hear me?
Yes, I can. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can. Yes. So you love your electric car?
I love it to bits, yes.
Why do you love it?
Oh. It's quiet, it's efficient, it's comfortable, it's just a beautiful ride. Full disclosure, I know I'm one of the lucky people in that I have a drive. I have installed a charging point, so I can charge overnight when I want to. I wanted an electric car really early on. And I looked when the Leaf was the only one available, sort of about, I don't know, 7 or 8 years ago. And at that time, its range just wasn't going to work. So I had to get a hybrid instead. But now, about 18 months ago, I bought my electric car. And it does about 240 on a full charge in the winter, and about 270 to 275 on a full charge in the summer, which gets me to anywhere I want to go basically, and I can charge it overnight at my home. So as I say, I am in a fortunate position. I did actually go down, I made a mistake, and I hadn't got it a full charge when I needed to go to Twickenham in London from Norfolk.
That's a long way from Norwich.
It's a bit away, and I hadn't got a full charge, so I was panicking somewhat. I arrived with 50 miles to spare, and because my son and his partner live on a main road, there's no way I can park anyway near them, so I have to park in the nearby side road, and they have the lamppost charging. So I just parked and plugged it in, and she came and did the funny stuff with the phone and the
scan the thing in, you know, the things that you have to do to pay remotely like that. And I just charged it up and was able to have a full charge to come home with.
Just out of interest,
So it was
can you remember?
really easy.
Can you remember how much the lamppost charging was?
£14 for a
Okay.
full charge from virtually 0 to 270 miles worth.
So
It was on.
that's
It
much
was on
cheaper.
Yeah. I don't know what it is now. That was a little while ago, but no, it would have been last year. Well, prices were high already, weren't they, last year?
Yeah, but
So-
that's much cheaper than going to a motorway service station where it's up in the 40, 50,
Oh,
60 pounds.
absolutely.
Yeah.
I didn't want to go to a motorway. I didn't want to go to a motorway service station because I was terrified. I'm 77, and I can cope with most things, but I wasn't sure that my first time at one of those, a service station, that I'd go to the right place, that I'd know how to put it, make it pay, plug it in, etc. I was just too nervous to do that. And as it happened, once I was going to get my son to sort it out for me when I got there. As it happened, I was able to do it easily overnight on a lamppost. As I say, £14. It may have gone up now, but that borough, Twickenham and Richmond, they're up there installing them in because they have people who don't have drives, and that's the only way they're going to get them to have electric vehicles.
Pat, I'm going to stop you. Pat, I'm going to stop you in Norwich because we've got 4 minutes to the end of the programme. We've got love to squeeze in John. Now, you normally buy a new car and run it for 10 years, and you get into the whole Bangonomics nightmare there. So, electric cars, you have doubts, don't you?
Sorry, I missed that. Can you repeat that?
You've got doubts about electric car batteries.
Well, yes, there's some information that the manufacturers have got to tell you.
It's not necessarily. Are you suggesting that batteries time significantly?
Oh, yes, yes.
Because that is challenged, and I've read, and I know Erin from Water Trade will challenge you on that one.
They will challenge me. It's just answering fact. All batteries lose their performance over a period of time.
Yeah, I do touch it. You're right. Of course, all batteries do lose their performance, but it's the rate at which they lose them, and the data coming out from the car brands that have been around for a decade is showing 1 to 2% loss a year. So it's pretty negligible, really, still.
That's what I tell you. But bear in mind that they also say they forget to say things like they don't recommend you charging them above 80%.
Yeah.
So that's a fact, right? That's the first thing. So how many people are going to charge them 100% and then deplete the age of their battery?
Yeah.
Factor. That's not another factor, isn't it? Plus, of course, somebody, did you mention about having them repaired?
Yes.
I think yes, you did, didn't you? Well, a number of them you can't do that. They're sealed. They're sealed batteries, and they're constructed in such a way you can't take them to pieces.
No, you're absolutely right that the layperson can't, but more and more car brands have realised that of course batteries need to be repaired now, otherwise their whole circular economy businesses don't work. And so you've got to take it to a dealership for sure. You can't tinker around with them like you used to be able to decades ago with engines.
John, thank you for that. Michael, you've got a minute. Now, you've had 2 EV cars starting in 2017. You must love it.
I do, yes, but we only had 2 because of an accident, so it's not because we got fed up with one or anything, or we're changing every 2 years.
So are you suffering range anxiety, or what's the issue that you've experienced?
We did initially with the V because it was only about 100 miles.
Yeah.
Can get up to, have got up to a 300 without current, which is a D Nero from 21, so it's about 2.5, 3 years old. No, I don't really have range anxiety, though sometimes it's just you're not confident about where there's motorway service stations having enough room or a short enough queue for you to get your charge when you're on a long journey and you want to get on with it.
Have you experienced long queues?
I've experienced queues where I've had to abandon and just hope that I get to the next one before I run out of charge, yes.
Oh, that's a bit tummy wrenching, isn't it?
It I think Mrs. Ferguson had a very apt note for it as bum clenching, yeah? And you get very tense, yes.
Michael in South Yorkshire, thank you so much. Erin Baker, editorial director of Auto Trader, we've had lots and lots of experiences, and it's very clear, isn't it, that there are some inequalities in charging. There is still a great anxiety about the availability of charging. Where should the government's absolute priority be?
I think the government's priority, first and foremost, has to be listening to what everyone said today, VAT equalisation for domestic and public charging. We've got to bring down the price of rapid and ultra-rapid charging, which is the sort of charging that everyone is going to need to use on the go.
Erin Baker from Auto Trader, thank you so much. Well, that's it for today. On tomorrow's programme, there are calls for telecom companies to scrap mid-contract price rises. One already has, but will the others follow? And after Chanel catwalks, Michelin comes to Manchester to dish out its awards. We were there. And after 2 years without a working government, how has Northern Ireland consumers lost out on the stalemate? It's Peter White tomorrow. Join him just after midday news.
Audio News was produced by Catherine Nolan. The studio managers were Owen Williams and John Cole. Now the weather forecast, here's Elizabeth Ritchie.
Thank you, Richard. Well, colder conditions will develop across the UK. The vast majority of us will head through the next 24 hours. That colder air sticking southwards from the north. Plenty of rain in the forecast for many of us, and for some, we'll say some snow. Let's start today in Scotland. It's much drier now in western Scotland, with that front having drifted southwards. Gales across northern Scotland with the risk of some gusts towards coastal areas, exposed coast and hills of up to 60 to 70 miles an hour, and there's some snow too across Shetland, blizzard-like conditions here. So wintry showers too, possibly across mainland Scotland, the snow levels dropping through the day in that colder feeling air, but for many it will be dry with some sunshine. Meanwhile, that band of rain has now moved southwards from Northern Ireland and Northern England. Some sunshine developing here. For Wales, the Midlands and East Anglia will be seeing some more heavy downpours through the afternoon. Blustery winds ahead of the front with gusts of 40 to 50 miles an hour. Much of central southern England, southeast England and southwest England should stay dry for the daylight hours, but it will be cloudy and stay quite windy with heavy rain through the evening rush hour. A range of temperatures today, 2 to 4 degrees Celsius for Scotland in that colder feeling air, but 13 or 14 degrees in southern England. Now tonight that heavy rain moves towards the southeast of England, where it will eventually clear. It's still mild in the south for much of the night with a hang back of cloud. The winds will ease down. Colder elsewhere with clear skies and lows of 0 to 4 degrees in much of England, Wales and Northern Ireland. Meanwhile, some heavy snow showers tracking southwards across western Scotland through the night. Do watch out for icy conditions, especially here. For many, temperatures will drop below freezing across much of Scotland. Wednesday, quite a colder day of weather with a lighter wind, still cloudy across the south of England. There could be some snow showers for western Scotland and the Northern Ireland.
Sarah Montague's here with the World at One in a few moments.
I'm Jeffrey Blatchy.
And I'm Keris Matthews. On BBC Radio 4, we're finding musical links.
Between what seem like disparate styles of music.
There's so many similarities between opera singing and this kind of singing because it's so present.
To start off the series, we'll have the London Bulgarian Choir live in the studio.
Together with the opera singer Nikki Spence and the singer-songwriter Corinne Bailey-Rae.
A particular kind of vibrato that sounds like you're sort of stopping the air. I've never heard singing like it.
Add to playlist. Returns to BBC Radio 4.
Starts on Friday evening at 7:15.
On Radio 4 and BBC Sounds.
This is BBC Radio 4, 92 to 95 FM, 198 longwave, on digital radio and on BBC Sounds.
Hello and welcome to the World at One with me, Sarah Montague. More Houthi attacks on British and American ships in the Red Sea.
You have just 5 minutes. If you don't alter your course in this time, you will be attacked.
For any seafarer, there is nothing that you can prepare for that. I think we're going to see a fallout of individuals that emotionally and mentally struggle.
We speak to a private security firm monitoring the threat and advising vessels what to do. The Archbishop of York, Stephen Cottrell, shares his thoughts on how the King will be coping with his cancer diagnosis.
His faith will sustain him through this. That is the heart of who he is as a person, let alone the King.
Also on the programme, the Pop Cons, the group who say they want to make the Conservatives popular again. We speak to their director, Mark Little. And
I grew up in an all-hill environment, and the doctor told my mum and dad not to let me sign. It's my responsibility at age 7 when I went there to fit into the hearing world.
the deaf star of a new one-woman show talks to us about growing up in solitary silence. The BBC News is read by Alan Smith.
Rishi Sunak has made his first public comments on the King's cancer diagnosis, saying he was thankful the disease had been caught early. The King returned to London from Sandringham yesterday and has already begun treatment as an outpatient. Mr Sunak began a cabinet meeting this morning by paying tribute to the King and wishing him a speedy recovery. Our correspondent Helena Wilkinson reports.
Speaking to the BBC, the Prime Minister said the King's cancer had thankfully been caught early. Rishi Sunak said he was shocked and sad to hear the news and that he was in regular contact with the King. Mr Sunak is still expected to continue his weekly audience with Charles. In his first comments, the Archbishop of Canterbury, Justin Welby, said he was praying for the King and his family. What hasn't been made public by Buckingham Palace is how long the King's treatment for cancer is expected to last. His diary of forthcoming public engagements was thought to include the Commonwealth Day service at Westminster Abbey next month, a tour to Canada and Trooping the Colour on June the 15th. At this stage, it's not clear if they will be affected.
The Iranian-backed Houthis say they have fired further missiles targeting British and American vessels in the Red Sea. One of the cargo ships is reported to have suffered damage to its bridge windows. No one was injured. The US Secretary of State Antony Blinken has been meeting Egypt's president as part of his latest effort to try to calm tensions in the Middle East. He'll travel to Tel Aviv later after Israel vowed to move its ground offensive against Hamas into the crowded city of Rafah in southern Gaza. Our correspondent Nick Beek reports from Jerusalem.
Antony Blinken's fifth trip to the Middle East since the Gaza war started includes stops in Egypt and Qatar. Both countries are integral to the current efforts to pause the fighting, which is viewed as essential for easing tensions in the region. Hamas have not yet delivered their verdict on the framework of a truce that's been put together, and the Israeli government are disagreeing publicly on the possible terms. An agreement could see an initial lull in hostilities of 4 or 6 weeks to allow hostages taken by Hamas to be released, more aid brought into Gaza, and hundreds of Palestinians released from Israeli jails. But fighting has broken out again in the north of Gaza, and Israel is promising to destroy remaining Hamas battalions in the southernmost city of Rafah, which is now home to 1 million dispossessed Palestinians who had been told they'd be safe there.
The former Chancellor, Kwasi Kwarteng, has announced he'll stand down as an MP at the next election. Voters in Spelthorne in Surrey gave him a majority of more than 18,000 at the last election. Mr Kwarteng is the second shortest serving Chancellor on record, spending just 38 days at the Treasury before being sacked by Liz Truss in October 2022 in the wake of the disastrous mini-budget. Rishi Sunak has denied making a mistake by agreeing a £1,000 bet about his Rwanda policy with the Talk TV presenter Piers Morgan. The Prime Minister said he was not a betting person, and the offer of a wager over whether flights would take off before the next election took him by surprise. He said he'd been trying to convey his absolute commitment to the plans. There have been protests in Turkey on the first anniversary of the devastating earthquake, with survivors complaining that reconstruction has been too slow. Thousands gathered for a pre-dawn vigil in the remains of the city of Antakya to mark the exact time of the first tremor of the quake, which killed more than 50,000 people across the country. Turkey's government insists it's rebuilding as quickly as possible. Louisa Vinton from the UN Development Programme described the scale of the housing crisis.
In the most affected regions, there are 800,000 people in temporary accommodation of some kind, and although most of them have been moved now into more fixed container cities, many of them are still living in less formal accommodation, tents or damaged houses where they will do their cooking in the house but spend the night outside. Many people are still traumatized.
The leader of a cult in Kenya has been charged with the murder of nearly 200 people after allegedly ordering his followers to starve themselves to death. Paul Mackenzie and 29 of his associates pleaded not guilty at the High Court in Malindi. More than 400 bodies were exhumed last year from land allegedly owned by Mr. Mackenzie. Our Deputy Africa Editor Anne Sawyer reports.
Paul Mackenzie arrived in court with prison bus, looking expressionless, and could be seen consulting with his lawyers. He and his co-accused deny murdering 191 people. The self-proclaimed preacher was earlier charged with committing acts of terror, child cruelty and torture, charges he denied. He is releasing a 1-year sentence for producing and distributing films, that's videos of his controversial sermons, without license. Survivors have told the BBC they were urged to starve themselves and their children to death so that they could get to heaven before the world ended. Paul Mackenzie has previously said he didn't force anyone to fast.
A 46-year-old man has been arrested on suspicion of malicious communication after the Conservative MP Mike Freer received a threatening phone call last week. Police say the incident is separate to an alleged arson attack on Mr Freer's constituency office on Christmas Eve. The MP for Finchley and Golders Green has announced that he'll step down at the next election after a series of death threats. The former Irish Taoiseach John Bruton has died at the age of 76 after a long illness. He served as Ireland's Prime Minister from 1994 to 1997, leading the coalition government into talks with the UK that culminated in the 1998 Good Friday Agreement. The former Prime Minister Sir John Major called Mr Bruton a formidable servant of the Irish nation and said he brought peace above political self-interest.
Alan, thanks very much. A British-owned ship was attacked in the Red Sea this morning. The UK MTO, or UK Maritime Trade Operation, said the ship's master was aware of a small craft on its port side before a projectile was fired at the ship. The US vessel was also attacked. Now, in both cases, the Houthis have claimed responsibility. Joshua Hutchinson is the Managing Director of Intelligence and Risk at Ambridge, a UK-based firm that specialises in maritime risk management, and it monitors attacks in the Red Sea, and he spoke to me earlier.
I can't disclose obviously detailed information. What we have articulated to commercial vessels operating in the area is that US, UK and Israeli affiliated vessels are deemed as extremely high risk. What we're aware is that there is a UK vessel that was successfully struck, but that vessel is still transiting underway and the crew on board that vessel are safe.
Right, so it's okay but still in an area where it might be vulnerable?
Correct, yeah, and obviously the southern Red Sea, the Bab el-Mandeb and the Gulf of Aden is where we've seen these series of events since the 19th of November where commercial vessels and merchant vessels have been targeted by the Houthis.
Do the Houthis give warning?
They have traditionally, since the beginning of the conflict in the southern Red Sea, they have called out to vessels, and they do try and give vessels those warnings by hailing them on the radio.
Well, let's hear one of those warnings, which is audio that you've released.
You have just 5 minutes. If you don't answer a call in this time, you will be attacked. Over. I'm attacking. And also, I have been under bombing. Recommend security IS and alter course away from territorial waters. Over. This is more suburban. We have a zone and we are doing maneuvering and going away from the land area. We have bombers on board currently and they are not firing, but still we have bombs landing here by our vessel in water.
So, can you explain what that was, that bit of audio?
That was the Houthis coming out and declaring themselves as Yemenese coast guards. They were contacting a vessel, telling them that if they didn't listen to them, they would be attacked, they would be targeted. On the other side of that, so that's something very alarming for a master, first and foremost, that they're being hailed and being forced to call into port. That is not normal standard maritime practice. But then to be on the other side immediately after, you've got a coalition warship telling the vessel to proceed on course, telling the vessel to ignore that in place. So a master then, who is fundamentally responsible for a vessel at sea, has to make a decision, and what they do. But obviously the Operation Prosperity Guardian has been successful in terms of supporting masters, supporting commercial vessels. So vessels are advised to ignore these calls and to continue on the voyage.
So over the airwaves, there is an argument with the Yemenis saying pull into the port and coalition warships saying continue on your course.
Correct. And this is something that we've seen evolve over the last couple of months, and something we've seen in other conflicts as well. Like I say, these channels are free to use, they're readily accessible, so it's low-tech equipment to be able to hail these radios and try and disorientate and confuse the master.
Now, from the vessel's point of view, the master, they are presumably then feeling very exposed, but hoping that anything that is fired at them will be intercepted by the Navy.
Correct. Obviously, private companies like Ambrose will be advising the master of